All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for the afternoon conversation with Climax conseils. Today, Elisabeth Vichitil and Jacques Thériault will be with us. Elisabeth will be presenting the document, and today we'll be talking about how you can prepare in the preparation of producing transplants. So there will be two sessions. Today is how to prepare for, and in January we're going to have another session that's going to be focused on how you do things. So without any ado, Elisabeth, please proceed with your presentation.
So welcome everybody. I'm gonna share. I don't know. Do you guys see my screen?
We sure do.
You do. And there we go. So welcome. I'm very happy to be presenting this first session today about plant propagation. So as Claude said, we are today going to talk more about the planning part, and the how to do is going to be in January. So the goal today is to help you calculate your needs, your orders, and all the equipment you need for the preparation of the seedlings and the transplant. So here's the program for this afternoon. So first, we're going to talk about how to choose your greenhouse vegetable cultivars. Then we're going to determine the quality criteria of the transplant. What do we want? What kind of transplant we want at the end when we want to bring them in the greenhouse. Define the densities. Determine the number of plants to produce. Determine the space needed in the nursery. Also, the calendar and management of the nursery space. We're going to talk about nursery layout. We're going to talk about choices of substrates, and also the choice of the containers, the grafting equipment, other equipment, and fertilization of transplants. So that's our program for today. So let's start with choosing the greenhouse vegetable cultivars. So of course, there's a few criteria that you need to take in consideration. There's your market, there's the taste, and the yield. These are mostly your, depending on your criteria. This is your part. And the part we want to talk today is the disease resistance. So what's the basic kit that is required to be able to obtain the yield you want? So for the tomatoes, the main soil diseases are mainly the corky root rot for tomatoes. And you have to know that there's no graft that is resistant to this corky root. So the only way to get away with it is to have rootstock. The Fusarium wilt also for tomatoes, the Fusarium crown and root rot also that affects tomatoes and cucumbers. And the resistance are not always present for these two. So the solution is to add a rootstock. And there's also the Verticillium alboatrum and Verticillium dahliae. Also, there's nematodes. So depending on the problems you have, there's different resistance that you can get by rootstock or by choosing a cultivar that has the resistance. So talking more about resistance on the foliage disease, I would say. So the starting pack would be the tomato mosaic virus, the leaf mold, which leaf mold has many names in the information you're going to have from the seed retailers. So it can be called Passiflora fulva. It can also be called leaf mold, or it can be called Cladosporium fulvum. So have it in mind, and especially for the growers that have no equipment to do the dishumidification, as we were talking this summer in the newsletter. If you don't have options with dehumidification, it's very important that you get this resistance. Otherwise, well, you will have to deal with it and be ready. There's also Fusarium oxysporum, Lycopersici, the race 1 and 2, and Fusarium oxysporum radici, Lycopersici. So these are some very important resistance to look for. We made you some nice charts here to give you an idea, and as we classified, okay, for small producers, small scale farmers, the numbers here are the first choice to fourth choice. There's 1, 2, 3 here. There's no 3, but anyway, so it gives you an idea, and this comes also, it's a rating that we gave from our client and from our experience of what people do and have good success with. So this is a little comment. Then you have the type of tomato, gives you the information, the color, the cultivar, the company, the seed company. The fruit size is important. That depends on the market. That depends on choices you make. And it will have also an impact later. We're going to talk about density. So this is an important aspect to know from which cultivar you're choosing. Here you have a column that tells you for leaf mold resistance. And also there's the different resistance. This is high resistance and this is intermediate resistance. These are, that's the way they are classified in the seed retailer, okay? So you can make your choice in these charts. We're not gonna talk about each specific cultivars, but I give you an idea. And there's another one because for tomatoes, there is quite many kind of tomato and kind of, so you have the choice. You have to know also that some cultivars, they have incomplete resistance kit. So it means that you will want to choose a cultivar and it won't have all the resistance you need. So many times the rootstock will help to have the right package. There's also many soil disease that will have their resistance only in the rootstock. So here are the main package you're looking for your rootstock. That will be the corky root rot, the Verticillium dahliae, Verticillium alboatrum, and also here are, I'm not going to try to pronounce these, but these are the 3 nematodes that are affecting the crops. So here for rootstock cultivar, our suggestions are for Tamino from Enzazaden, which is a balanced power. That means more the balance is in between reproductive and vegetative. So these for Tamino and Keza from RIX1, these are 2 rootstock that are quite balanced. Maxifor is known as more vigorous than reproductive. It's a strong one, but still is a very, it's there for a long time. It's a classic on rootstock. And it's from the Router. Now for cucumbers. There's many kind of resistance that you can have for cucumbers, but the mains that we suggest that you should have at least are the Cladosporium cucumerinum, which is the scab. I know a few of you guys had that during the summer. Corynespora cassicola, target spot, is also something that there's not too many, we don't have too many tools to fight it like as a biopesticides or pesticides. So that's why having the resistance is interesting. And then PM is powdery mildew, the oidium. If you plan on growing cucumbers during the fall time, late summer, fall time, that's the period where powdery mildew is mostly aggressive. So it's a good idea to choose a cultivar that has the resistance. So for cucumbers, there's a few things you have to take in consideration. So one first point is that if you plan on growing cucumbers between October and January, you have to be careful because there is a sensitivity between the genetic resistance to powdery mildew, which you're going to want, and a low level of light. So in the chart, I'm going to show you just the next slide. There's a column for winter cucumbers. So if you're thinking of growing during that period, it's very important that you make sure that it's the cultivar you're choosing is adapted for that season. Otherwise, there is also the high wire system versus umbrella system. Depending on the system you're going to choose, There are cultivars that are adapted to one or another. Here, we didn't make a slide about it, but I just want to clarify what is what. The high wire system is the system where you plant as, like you will plant the tomato. You're going to plant your cucumber and it's going to go up the wire. And when it's growing over, you're going to wrap it on the rope and you're going to bring it down as you would do for tomatoes. You're going to take off the leaves on the bottom. It's going to be the same. It's the same trailing way as tomato. The umbrella one is going to be planted to distance that is larger. Like there's going to be more space in between the plants because your plant is going to grow until the wire, which the wire will be lower. In the umbrella system, we're trying to be able to work without the ladder. So the idea is to never have the ladder, and there's less human work and entertain on the plant every week. Also, it's going to grow to this wire, which is lower, and the head is going to run on the wire and come down before the next plant is planted. And then we're going to manage more the fruit load on the umbrella system. And depending on when you're going to unload the plant with the fruits, suckers are going to come out. So the difference here that we want you to pay attention is that there are some cultivars, the ones that are selected for high wire system, that will not take out suckers as easy as the ones that are classified for umbrella. So here in this slide, we're saying the umbrella can work for all training system. It means you can use the umbrella for the high wire system, but the cultivars that are classified for high wire system, some might not work good on the umbrella system. So think of which one you're trying, and specifically if you're working on the umbrella system, make sure you're choosing the umbrella system. I hope this was clear. Then there's also two kinds of cucumber. There's the parthenocarpic gynoecious. I think I pronounce it good. This means that the plant will produce only female flowers. And also the parthenocarpic, it will mean that the flower does not need to be pollinated in order to set the fruit. You don't need any bees in the greenhouse if you're using parthenocarpic cultivars. Most of the European and the Lebanese type are this way. There's also a few of the American. For the monoecious cultivar, it means that the plant will have both flowers, male and female, on the same plant. The male flowers are going to be more on the main stem, and the female flowers will come out a little later or on the suckers. It's just good to know about that. The climate will also influence. If your climate is more vegetative or reproductive, you're going to send the energy to bring out more male or female flowers, which if you're taking out only male flowers, well, the yield will be impacted. So it's good to know about that. And most American cultivars are monoecious, and also the field cultivars are like that too. So it's elements to take in consideration in your choice of cultivar for cucumbers. So here's a chart. Again, we got the preference for small scale and preference for high-tech greenhouse. So you can have an idea. The type of cucumber, the cultivar, the company, the length, which if you're growing for the big market can be sometimes specific, their need of which size of cucumber they want. And here you have the resistance. So we suggest the 3 first are important, but it's always good to have all the others that are over there. Here we put the season. So if you're growing in the winter, you have fewer choices than if you grow during the summer and spring and fall time. Also, there's specification for umbrella versus high wire. So that's for cucumbers. For peppers, we don't have so much resistance we're looking for. We're just here suggesting a few cultivars that work good. So for blocky, there's red, orange, and yellow. So we suggest you a few cultivars, and the pointed or conic peppers. There's the red. The Carmen is quite classical for peppers. Red peppers, conic. Okay, so that was for the choice of cultivars. Now we're gonna determine the quality criteria for the transplant. So, of course, we're looking for a production of strong and vigorous plants. Here we want to make sure that, because later on we're going to talk about delays between seedling and harvest, or seedling and transplanting. So we want to tell you what we're talking about here. And the goal is to have strong and vigorous transplant that when you're going to put them in the ground, they're going to root really quickly, and they're going to start setting fruits as quickly as possible. So we are also looking for root air pruning, which we're going to talk more in January on how to do that. But this is the picture that we're talking about. Is we're looking for roots that are very strong and that are how can I put this in English? Here we want to have enough air in the pot so that the air will create like a little burning on the end of the root and will split. We want a lot of splitting in the roots. So if you imagine putting this one, do you see my mouse? Wait, I'm gonna put the pointer here. Here, that's what I'm talking about. So imagine transplanting this one versus this one. This one is just gonna bite in the ground and get there. This one might take a longer time. So we're looking for this one. That's what we call root air pruning. We can do a little bit the same for the organic roots in the pots. This one is not as clear or as nice as this one, but we're looking for this stage of plant to be put in the ground. The roots are ready, leaves are ready. So what we're talking about is tomatoes. We're looking for 8 to 10 true leaves, or we want to have 50% of the plant that have one first open flower. This is the stage we're looking for. Also, the idea of the flower is an idea that it gives you a plant that already started its reproductive side. So the balance between vegetation and reproduction is already starting. So this is what we're looking for tomatoes. And as Claude asked earlier, sometimes when you are in a cold greenhouse, you don't have a heating system, we might tolerate to transplant a little bit earlier because the temperature in the pot will get cold, and this has an effect that is very, very reproductive. So instead of dealing with that, we will sometimes choose to put it in the ground, which is going to be warmer. But it's just in that case, if you have heating system, it shouldn't be a problem, and it's better to plant to the right stage. Here is for a cucumber. Again, we want strong and vigorous transplant, and we want them well balanced. So it's about 4 to 5 true leaves. For the pepper, we're looking for the first Y, the first splitting, which is around here. We don't see it so good, but I give you an idea of how big the plant's supposed to be. It's about 12-inch high. And whoop, I went too fast. For the eggplant, usually we're looking for a plant that has a well-balanced root and foliage that will give a plant that's about 12-inch tall. So that was for criteria. Now we're going to talk about determine the density according to the type of greenhouse you have. So for those who followed the session last winter, we were talking about different type of greenhouses. based on the lightning, the amount of light that's coming in. So we're not gonna re-explain all the details. You can have it in the presentation of last year. Just here's a reminder. The type 1 is high luminosity greenhouse with CO2 injection. The type 2 is a high luminosity greenhouse without the CO2 injection, or medium luminosity greenhouse with the CO2 injection. There's also type 3, medium luminosity greenhouse without CO2, and the type 4 is a low light greenhouse without CO2. For those that I know, in general, you guys are in between type 2 or 3. What can make the difference, if we can just say a word about that, it will be what's in the ceiling. Do you have too many, sometimes too many trusses, or depending on the age of the greenhouse, some have more stuff in the ceiling, so it will block the light. So that's the first thing. And then second thing that will impact will be the age of your plastic. If your plastic is old, it lets in less light than if you have a 1 or 2 years plastic. So figuring out which type you are, then you can determine the density that you're going to need on each crops. So for tomatoes, it is important to take in consideration the size. This is the size of the tomatoes. That will make a difference. So if you're a type 2 or 3, you're going to be around these density. These are, and yeah, it's written heads per square meter. So the idea here is that for one cluster that will have, example, for tomatoes at 200 grams, that will make 800 grams. And if you have the same cluster, which 300 grams or 400 grams, if you're having a really extra large tomato, that will make more than a kilo on the same cluster. So the plant, in order to produce the same amount of fruit, will need to have more light concentrated on one plant. So that's why we're going to put less plant per square meter. That's to dispatch the light function to how big the tomatoes are going to be. That's one thing you have to think ahead of time. The other thing we're going to do once we're in the production, of course, if you're making a 1 pound tomato, we're probably going to prune them to 2 fruits per cluster instead of 4. But the element of density has to be decided before. It has to be planned ahead of time. So that's why we're talking about it right now. Cherry tomatoes, there's just only one column because they're all around 10 to 20 grams. So that's for tomatoes.
So
then for
Elizabeth, yes. I have a question. Yes. It's Amy Thornton. Are these numbers talking what if there's multiple crops in the same greenhouse space or different varieties? Is there assumption that that's happening in some of these greenhouse types, or are you just thinking these densities are indications based on having just like beef tomatoes, like in the whole greenhouse?
I think I understand your question. You tell me if I understood good. But if you have, let's say, 3 varieties, you have cherry, you have a medium beef, and you have an extra large beef, they will all have each their density different.
Okay. And if you have cucumbers as well in there?
Well, the cucumbers, we're going to have another chart to know which.
Okay.
But the idea of following the density that is associated to your greenhouse type will help you have crops that are balanced pretty much at the same time.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
Welcome. So here we have it for the cucumbers. So there's the English. Here we put English and Lebanese, but if you're growing American and English are on the same page. They're on the same over here. We should have put American too. So you have this choice, and then you have the choice of high wire or umbrella. As I said before, the umbrella will be more spaced because you will have the head's gonna run on the wire and you'll take out the suckers, so it will take the place. So you have to think that you need place, you need room for them. So these are the choices that you have to make in order to choose. Are you going to put this one or are you going to use this one? Here's the density that we recommend for peppers. There's two different, the blocky and the pointed they have little difference, mostly because of the size of the peppers. For eggplants, there's a little strategy that's different. We evaluate with we call it our light chart, that depending on the type of greenhouse you have, the type 1, 2, or 3, there's a maximum of fruit that you can produce per stage of fruit. You know, the eggplant will make one fruit, and then another level, another level. So we're calculating per level. We calculated that the eggplant can give you, for example, for a type 2, 2 kilo and 147 gram. That comes from our chart, so it's a very specific number, but it doesn't matter. So that's how much should make 1 square meter, 1 level per square meter. So depending on the size of the eggplant you're choosing, if you're choosing I give you an example for 400 grams of an Italian eggplant, you will take the amount you can make per stage for a square meter divided by the size, and that will give you how many heads you can put in a square meter. If you're planning on picking them smaller or bigger, then it will change the amount of heads. And that is the goal. The goal of the density is to keep going with your production, not to make, like, for example, if your density is, you put this density, but you plan on harvesting at 500 grams, well, then you will make so many fruits and then it will abort on top. So the idea is to try to keep a flow in your harvest. If you have Asian or mini eggplants, well, the calculation you can make is that your eggplant for one, here we take it as the Italian will make only one fruit. If you take an Asian or a small one, that will give you 2 or 3 of, let's say, 100 grams or 150 grams. Well, then how many are you going to leave per knot? That will give you 250 or 300 grams. So then you divide your 2,147 by, let's say I make 2 fruits of 125, that will make 250 grams. So you'll divide it by that. So your density will be higher on the Asian and the mini than on the big Italian. I don't know if this is clear, but if you need help with that, don't be afraid to give us a call just to make sure that you chose the right density. So that was for densities. Now we're gonna determine the number of plants to produce. So to make the correct calculation, we need the following information. We need the length of your beds, and we need the bed width. By that we mean we calculate from center to center, so don't forget to take in consideration the path in the middle. We also need to know the number of beds per crop that you want to grow. The densities, which we just gave you the information how to find it. And then the two questions are, do you graft, and do you do single heads or double heads? Here, to determine numbers and all this, we're going to be using an Excel chart. So I want to let you know we're going to give you this chart. It's an Excel chart, and if you have any difficulties with Excel, we can help you, of course. Don't worry. The other thing is, whenever I give and I think Jacques does the same, whenever we prepare you a chart in Excel, we always put a color to tell you these are the cells you have to change, where there's no no formulas, no calculation in it. So in this case, all the boxes are purple. So I'll give you the next slides. It's going to be parts of this chart because it's a really long chart that has a lot of columns, but I'll try to explain it to you. You will have it after, and if you need help, really feel free to give us a call about that. So the first information, you start by indicating your bed dimensions in meters. So I put the reference as if your measurements are in feet or inches. Here, that's the first information that will help calculate the areas and surface. So for an example, we put 30 meters and 1 meter 60 for the width. That makes us a 48 square meter per bed. So depending on the crop, you will have to choose the line. We made you an example of line for all different situations. So depending on your situation, you will choose the line that is referring to your situation, depending if you're doing beef or cherry, if you're graphing or non-graphing, if you're doing single or double head. So you have all these options. We also take in consideration that you're going to make a double wire crop, but that you're going to plant one way, one line in the middle, okay? And the same question will appear when you're going to be managing the eggplant. But here in this presentation, I'm just going to show you for tomatoes and some little specification for cucumbers. When it's different, I'll show you. So first you choose the cultivars and you place it on the lines that belongs to your situation. For cucumbers, you can choose your English, American, and Lebanese, depending if you're doing the umbrella or the high wire. Again, it's a double range, but it's also always one, how can I put this? There's one line of plants.
It's one row of plants.
One row, thank you. Sorry. Okay. Then you're going to indicate the number of beds you're planning on, and also the density. The density we put over there are, you're going to have to go in the charts and see, depending on your type, you're going to place your density for example, for your cherry tomato, which your density. So you're going to change this. And if you're making one row, half a row, 3 row, that's not row, that's beds. Anyway, you're gonna change it over there. We take in consideration that if you're doing double heads, there's gonna be 2 heads per pot. And if you're doing single head, it takes in consideration that there's only 1 head per pot. So your pot density will be cut in half if you're making double head, and it will be the same as your density of heads if you're making only 1 head. So that's why it's important to choose the right line at the beginning. Which one are you doing? Grafted, double heads, etc. The number of beds will multiply with the area we said earlier, because you put your length and width from your beds. So for example, if I put 2 beds, of course, it's going to come here and it's going to be 96 square meter. Okay, so the calculation is already planned over there. And the desired pots final, I'm taking 1 pot to 1.65 pot per square meter, because we're talking pots at the end. And since now we're going to be talking about pots and not about heads, because it can get very mixed up, the heads, when you make double heads and when you make single heads. So we talked about it over here, and then all the other things we're going to see in the chart are going to be about pots and not about heads. I'm just specifying it. So you see, if you're making single heads, you're going to make quite much more pots than double heads. There you go. Then you got your desired pots that are final. And then depending on the technique you're using, we suggest that the excess seeding or seedling? I always said seedling. Will be bigger than if you're not grafting, for example. So for the sowing, you have an amount. For the grafting, you have another extra. For the transplanting, you have another extra. So in order to make 79 final pots, you're going to sow 119 to be able to transplant after the grafting 99, and then have an excess of 87 in order to be able to choose your 79 best ones for the greenhouse. So we put an extra here. You can choose to bring it down a little bit if you say, I'm really good at graphing and I'm really good at whichever. You can. That's a percentage that we suggest in order to be able to have at the end the good amount of pots of good quality transplants. Here for the non-grafted, and every non-grafted we put the amount is lower because we're taking consideration you won't have lost from grafting, of course. Okay, for the cucumber, we put an amount of 25% for the cucumber. It could be a little bit lower if you want. The desired pot, we just want to say here that usually we don't transplant. We seed in the pot directly because all the cucumbers family, they don't like transplanting. So usually, and the period between the seed and they're ready to be in the ground is so short that you can put it directly in the 4-inch pot. So that's why there's only one column. That could be 125 is very secure, could be a little less. And then there's only sowing. There's nothing in those columns because we're not recommending to transplant. So to determine the space and that is needed in the nursery, we have principles that you have to know. First of all, we suggest that the plants should never touch each other. In order for them to receive the light, the proper light, then they should never touch each other. And you also have to know that the plants will double their leaf area every 4 days. So usually, like, by saying they double their leaf area every 4 days, we're not saying you have to space them every 4 days. So the plan we made was that they will come from the seedling, the plates to the pots, and then spaced first time, and then bring in the greenhouse. And we suggest a density that will make you be able to do the job so that you don't have to space them like 4 times because it's a lot of work and a lot of loss of time. So here, again, for the rootstock, you got to enter the number of cavities in the multi-cells that you're using. It's over here. And we suggest usually especially for organic sowing, we suggest to sow 1 cell on 2. That's to make a good balance between air space versus the roots. In greenhouse production, seedling production, we're looking to make foliage as fast as possible. So, but in order to have the roots that fits with the leaf that will fit with the roots, it's a good ratio to have half of them. So if you choose that technique, just make sure that you put 64 instead of 128. Just put the real one. How many are you going to put? Even if you're using 128, if you're planning on putting 64, just put 64. That way, the calculation, if you need 119 seeds, but if you put 64, well, then it will give you how many trays you need to make. It also give you then a multiply, and then it'll give you the spacing in square feet.
So Elisabeth, in our first conversation earlier this afternoon, we talked about the peat base mix versus the rock wool. So this is particularly important for peat base substrate, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because the rock wool plates are already spaced properly. We'll show you a picture later on, but you're gonna see what we mean. The holes are already spaced like if there was one hole on two. But when you see the picture, you're gonna understand. So this is specifically for the peat trays. Also, we mentioned that for larger cells can be used for rootstock because the transplant will stay in there longer. So of course, the graft, you will take just the part that's on top, just the foliage, but the roots don't need to follow because we're not gonna take them out. So they can be used in smaller cells, and the rootstock can be in a little bigger cells. Then here's the space in the nursery for the pots. So you have to enter the type of pots you're going to use. So of course here, and I think I'm going to repeat this information many times, for longer crops like tomato, peppers, and eggplants, they are longer in the pot. So we suggest for you to use the 6-inch pots, because for the time that you have nice roots and nice size transplant on top foliage area, in order to have that balance, you need a certain amount of fertility in the pot, and you also need it also need to retain the water enough. If you make tomatoes in 4 inches, you're gonna water all the time. So it's in order to make a good quality of plant, the 6-inch is really the best for these crops. The 4-inch can be used, of course, for cucumbers and beans because they stay in the pot for about 2 to 3 weeks maximum. So it's necessary to plan the spacing, as I was talking a little bit before. You could space them like every 4 days, but instead of that, we suggest that you use a density of 12 heads per square meter, and you make one spacing, and then from that, you can bring them in the greenhouse, and they will be almost close to just a week before the real transplant in the ground. So here, how the chart works, it will take your transplant that you needed, the 87, and if you're on 6-inch, it took, we put a factor, conversion factor in this cell that will calculate how many square feet you need for the pots at transplanting. That means they're all together, and then if you have 12 heads per square meter, you will need 156 square feet. I'll show you pictures of the spacing a little further. Here, that was just to show you that for the cucumbers, you'll put your 4-inch, but it will take the spacing for the sowing. As before, the sowing was taking in consideration the cells, the plates, which this one will take in consideration your 4-inch pots over here. We made it like that. That's what we recommend. So here is the spacing, all the pots together. These are like, actually, this is a picture of where I used to work in New Richmond. So these are the first spacing when you transplant, it's tomatoes. And then the second one, you see there's one spacing. They look to have a lot of space, but that gives you the time. It's about 2 weeks that you can just move them like that and not remove them until you will bring them in the greenhouse. Also, you have to take in consideration 1 head plant takes less room than a double head plant. So, or you plan on having more room in the nursery, or you will have to bring them in the greenhouse earlier to an earlier stage. So this is something you have to take in consideration. And this one is the table will take into account the length of the row that we put at the beginning are 30 meters, and the number of pot that is desired at the end to determine the spacing between the pots. So the chart will tell you what's the spacing you have to put your pots in the greenhouse. So now we're going to talk more about the schedule, the sowing schedule. So it's going to be according to the culture. It will be according to the time of the year, if you're sowing in the winter or if you're sowing more in the springtime. There's more light, so the time is going faster. The delay is faster. The harvest start date. And also it takes in consideration, are you graphing? Are you doing double heads? If you're doing just single heads, no graphing, it's faster. So that's all elements we're gonna put in the chart to have the right schedule. So the times that we present here, they are for spring sowing by a well-established and experienced grower. So here are the lines that will have, you'll have to extend the delays here if your sowing takes place before January 15. So if there's less light, you have to think 40 days extra. If it's the first time you're doing, it's not transplant here, it's the graphing. So if it's your first time graphing, you should have the 7 days. And also, if you know that the temperatures you're going to be, the temperatures you're able to give your plants are lower than what we recommend. Usually, the ratio you should have is to add an extra 10% of delay on each degree you will be colder. We're not going to talk about temperatures today, but I think you guys know your limits. If you have limits on how much you can heat your nursery or not, well, that's already, if you're on the limit and you say, oh, I'm going to just put 18 degrees or my nights are going to be cold, it's already something you have to think about and add some days in the schedule you're doing. The temperature part, we're going to talk more during the January session. It's recommended to start with a longer period and, think in a conservative way. Give yourself the time, and as better and better you get, then you can shorten your schedule from 1 year to another. Because if you plan it too short and then your harvest is delayed, then it's the yield that is delayed. So it's better take more time at first, and the more you get experience and the more you get confident, especially for the graphing, well, then you can make it shorter. So here it's to give you an idea. So once you're experienced, sowing should be about 14-15 days. The graphing is usually on the 15th day. And then the time that the graph will recover should be about 7 days. But it can go up to 14 days. That's why we said you can add the 7 days the first year, and then you'll see how it goes. The transplanting with the pinching, then you transplant, and the time that the two heads are going to come out and it's going to need space, it's about 13 days. Then it's going to be another 14 days space, as I show you on the picture, with space in between. They will be good for 2 weeks like that. And then you will need to bring them, then they will need another spacing, but usually we bring them in the greenhouse right at their place without planting right away. If the stage is not ready, it will stay another 7 days in the greenhouse. And then also we count the amount of days depending on the variety. So of course the cherry tomato is shorter than the beefsteak. And if you're choosing a really big beef, you can add on to this 56 days. It's 8 weeks. 8 weeks is normal, but if you're having like really big tomatoes, it can be a little longer. So I give you an idea of how many days you gotta be planting ahead. I want to add yes.
Oh, Elisabeth, you were going there. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
You want to mention something about transplanting and pinching at the same time, I believe. Sorry.
No, but I was going there after, but of course, yeah. Good point. Yeah, transplanting and pinching. I like the option that you transplant and you pinch at the same time, because when you pinch, is you take off the leaf and the energy has to go somewhere. So when you plant at the same time, you create only one stress, and the energy will go in the roots. So I always find that it's a good technique to do both at the same time. So that's one thing. The other thing is, you see, when you're doing single heads, of course, the time of transplanting, you'll have to space faster because there's only one head. So if you choose always your right line, you will have the good information until the end of the chart. The other element is over here. The chart take in consideration that you will sow the rootstock 3 days before the graft, which this information you have to test it out in your situation, depending on which graft you choose, which rootstock you have. So you have to make the test maybe 2 or 3 weeks before you're planning on. Maybe just seed a few, like 10 seeds of each, and see which one's coming out after how many days. Because today we're not talking about grafting, but in January we will. The importance to have the same sizes of stems at 15 days. You want them to match together. So if it takes longer to germinate one or the other, it might not fit together. So this number here can be changed because it depends on your situation. It can be 3 days, it can be 2 days, it can be 1 day. So always make a test of that if you're grafting. So then you have the calendar. So the way this chart works, you have to decide the date of harvest that you want to harvest, your first harvest. So it works by the harvest, so don't change the sowing and things like that. These are formulas to come back from the harvest. For here, we put it all at 15th of June, for example, but it will give you different dates of seedling. So if you decide that you want to do all your seedlings the same day, just make sure that you will play with the date of harvest in order to get it over there, and not to change it here, because the formulas, the calculation won't work. Another detail is over here, you see that if you're non-grafted, well, that shouldn't be there, but see, you graft and you transplant on the same date, there shouldn't be a grafting over there, a grafting date here. But it's all telling you, when are you going to need the space? When are you going to transplant? When are you going to get in the greenhouse? When your greenhouse needs to be ready? So that's all very interesting information that you need to know in order to make your planning. So I think that was pretty much, no, this, okay. For cucumber, yeah, you see we took off these. There's nothing for grafting and transplanting for cucumbers because, of course, there's none. There's only sowing and nursery spacing and then greenhouse spacing. So it's the way we made the chart. So I think if you once you have it, you might think that save a lot of calculation. So that was the part on the planning. That was the part on the seedlings, how many seeds you need, how much space, how much plates, how much pots. That was that part. Now we're going to talk more about the layout of the sowing chambers. So what do you need to have to be ready? So of course, the artificial lighting, there's different options. There's the fluorescent lights, there's the HPS, there's the LEDs, which the LEDs, if you're growing a good proportion of tomatoes in your seedlings, we don't suggest you to use LEDs because there was a lot of edema problems with that. Also, because for the size of greenhouses you have, we don't think economically it's worth it to go there. It's more expensive. You'll save on electricity, but for the size, that's not necessarily a good a good option. Also, here we talked about white curtain for light reflection. In the picture here, there's a clear curtain, which a white curtain would be much better. And here I just want to make parenthesis. I don't know if you guys had snow in New Brunswick, but here in Quebec, we got snow last week, and I found that this idea of the white is reflecting the light is so obvious that it's just, I just want to say, that's the best example to understand that the light reflects, and it would give a lot more light to your ceilings having a white curtain in this situation. This is just an example. Some people use the whole much bigger space, but just in this case, the white walls or the white curtain are good for light reflection. Also, in a situation like that, you got to make sure you can open it to vent. And of course, the lights are creating a lot of heat during the day, but once the lights are off at night, you have to have a heater. You get to make sure there is a heater, and there is a thermometer to measure the soil at first before germination, and then the air temperature once the seedlings are out. You also have to have something to fog a little bit to make the space not too dry. So here are for your needs of artificial lighting in the seedling chamber. So for fluorescent, the needs are 40 watts per square meter in the PAR, which is the photosynthetically active radiation. So you don't take just the watts that are written on the box. You have to figure out the watts that are in the PAR. So the watts in the PAR, they're usually between 400 to 700 nanometer, the spectra of light. And the objective is to have 12 moles per square meter per day, including losses, like as we've seen on the picture before. So we suggest more to have a goal of 15 moles per square meter per day. So here we give you an example with the 54 watt, the T5 fluorescent. Okay, for this example, on the label, they're written 6,400 Kelvin. That means there's a lot of blue light. And just as a little thumb rule, the higher Kelvin they are, the more cold light you're going to have. So don't take fluorescent that are like 3,000 Kelvin. They will make a very nice light that you will like in your living room, but the plants won't like it. That's going to be warm white, which you want cold. And the cold is the higher Kelvin. Also, here the example is for the Sun Blaster, 54 watt. And we know for this example, the information we have, they are 3,730 lumens. That makes 8579 micromole per square meter per second at the temperature of 6,400 Kelvin, which here I just want to tell you, this is not a rule. This is the specification of this one, of this fluorescent special. So it's always important to check the specification and to figure out. We have charts, so if you're planning on redoing your or buying fluorescent, we can help you out to make sure that, depending if you have the information in the Kelvin or in the lumen, to figure out how many moles it means. So just don't take this calculation for granted. It's just an example. So if we bring these micromole per square meter per second at this temperature, we use them 16 hours. We know that one tube will make 4.94 mole per square meter per day. So if our objective is 15 mole per square meter per day, we can take 3 tubes and we will have enough light. There's also another option is to use cold, white, and grow light. We want to just tell you that if you buy fluorescent, buy the article ones, the growing one, because it means that they've been tested for the plants. There's a lot of tubes of fluorescent on the market, but they're not all made for plants and they're not all in the right spectra of light. Okay, and here that is a picture to show you a little bit what we were saying about the Dell on the previous slide. Here's the example with the fluorescent. There's different intensity of light. So what you see that an overlight is not the best. It makes the plant very short and too much short, actually. So the intensity, but there's also here are dells of just a little difference. They took the peak of green and they just changed the spectra a little bit, and it gave seedlings that are very elongated. Voyons. Étiolé. How do you say étiolé? Stretch. Okay. So it's just to tell you that there is a lot of different products on the market, and to be careful because it can have a real impact on your seedlings. So if you want to work with dells, just give us a call and we're gonna help you figure out to choose which one. But if you want to make a, you know, we're very comfortable with everybody using fluorescent, the growing ones. You should have a choice that is quite secure. Also, well, usually we use the lights 16 to 18 hours a day, and you have to take in consideration that will make a lot of heat emission. So that was for the lights. Then for your shells, the space in between each shelves should be a minimum of 16 inches, because you have to take there's the plate, there's the plant, there's the dome when you're going to graft, and the light. So in order to have enough light, in order to have the light equal on the whole plate, well, 16 inches is at least the minimum you should have. Also, make sure you have a thermostat or your boîte ventilée, ventilated box over here. Something that is precise enough in the nursery, that's important. It can have an impact on stretching or non-stretching your plants depending on temperature. Here is just a picture of how it can work. You can have 3 levels of, generally the tubes are 48 inches. And if I go on the other side, you got three tubes. So also the distance, if they are too close, the light reflection that's going to come like this needs to cross. If your light is over there, it's too close, well, the plant that's in between won't have the same light. So it's important that there's at least a little, the 16-inch is the minimum to have the light equally dispatched. So about the heating during the photo period, so during the day when your lights are on, the lights will provide a large part of the heating. And during the night, of course, you will need to have an electric baseboard or a dragon that will be controlled by a thermostat. And usually we suggest that your thermostat is not too cheap, that you have certain precision in it. Also, to have alarms should be a good thing to have, especially because we make the seedlings during a period where there's cold outside. So that's a good element to think about and to put something in place. Now, in the nursery, whether to determine if you need or don't need the lights during that period, it depends on the time of the year and where you're gonna do your transplant. If you are in a greenhouse, but you're in between November to mid-January, you will need to add light. The light from outside, natural light, won't be enough. If you're after mid-January, then you don't need to add light. There will be enough of natural light if you're in the greenhouse. If you do your transplants all indoors, then you need to have artificial lights. Again, we need the 40 watt per square meter in the PAR if you're in the building. If you're in the greenhouse, but in November to January, then usually you need to add a 17 watt per square meter. That means that the 23 watts, other watts are coming from natural light. Again, it's 16 to 18 hours a day. We're looking for the same 12 moles per square meter per day. It can be just light or it can be sun and light. Using HPS for that period, it creates less shading than the fluorescent. And also you have to think that the heat emission has to be taken in consideration. It's possible to install your propagation space in the greenhouse to take advantage of natural light and have enough space. I suggest if you have the heating capacity to do it in the greenhouse, because you're going to gain a lot. You will have much more than the 440 watt per square meter in the PAR by having the whole sunlight after the 15th of January. You also need to have ventilation, something that will ventilate. Sometimes some people, they have just the roll-up. In January, the roll-up are stuck with the snow. So just think about that. You need to have positive pressure or have a root opening. Also, we're going to see pictures of the tables, how they're, we'll just give you an example. Also think that your watering system, you'll have to water. Many times we water by hand, so it's just things to think about. So when you do it in the greenhouse, generally it's close to 1/3 of the length of the greenhouse is good. It's adequate for the heating capacity at this time of the year. So what I mean by that is that your heating capacity sometimes is based, for example, you plan on bringing the plants at the end of April or beginning of May. So your heating power is based on the temperature in the beginning of May. So if you bring your transplant in the greenhouse beginning of April, the nights are way colder. So in order to use all your heating capacity for a smaller area, you will be able to get the right temperature if you close a part of the greenhouse. So usually 1/3 should fit for the delay for your transplant in the greenhouse. So one option is to close it. Here we put you the greenhouse and you just close it with a plastic, a clear plastic around, and it can just close the area. Of course, it will close. We didn't put the picture, but it will close the greenhouse in the other direction over here. So here are some limits of the propagation space. So you can use your cold room for the seedlings, okay? It's okay for seedlings, it's okay for grafted plants, and it's very okay for grafted plants. I don't suggest to graft in the greenhouse, especially in the spring. There's too much sun, too much light, so you control much better the temperature when you're in basement or in a closed area. But be aware that to acclim. Oh, I don't. Okay, so the main problems in the cold room will be the heat and the humidity management. It can get too hot or not enough humid or things like that. So these are the limits, especially also in the basement, you'll have the same problems. You need to vent, you need to heat, and you need to manage your humidity. So here are some examples of a propagation space in the greenhouse. There's these clear tables, the Dramix tables. The fact of having tables is good because your heating balloons can be under it and will dispatch the warm air under. So it's a very, very good way to do it. Also in the greenhouse, well, you have the roof that can open or your positive pressure on top that will vent. Here's another example. Some people do that. They make a smaller greenhouse in the bigger greenhouse. So this picture is to show you, just be careful of what's making shade in the roof. Here you see on the ground, here it's much more darker, so this is the shade, but eventually during the day, the shade is going to come in the space of the seedling, so you got to be careful to that. Also be careful that you got two greenhouse effect, so you need good ventilation when you do that. It can become very hot very quickly. And for the light, well, you gotta know that the plastic is blocking a part of the light. So if you have double plastic, well, then you have less light twice. Here's a really nice space of propagation. Very easy system of tables on chaudière, on
Buckets.
buckets. Thank you. And the balloons are under, so the heat is coming from the bottom. The positive pressure is over there, and maybe the roll-up will open eventually, depending if there's snow or not. The watering system goes in the aisles like that, so this is quite a nice system. So that was it for the layout of the nursery. Now we're going to talk about the choices of the substrate for hydroponic first, and then for organic, we're going to go one from the other. So in the hydroponic system, there's different system, and there's different matches that you can make. You can use something different from the sowing, the transplanting, and the rock wool. So there are mixes that are better than others. And one thing you have to think is the sucking effect from one to another. The capillarity in between each can create a movement of water that can be good or less good. So if you work on rock wool at sowing to transplanting to planting, you won't have any sucking effect. And then if you go from peat mix to peat mix to peat mix, that's the same. But if you have, for example, rock wool to cocoa fiber, then you will have a sucking effect. So you have to know it. You have to plan on how you're gonna manage it. We have the same thing in the ground. In the soil, we have peat, and then soil. And depending on your soil, there will be a sucking effect from the soil. So here is for rock wool seedlings. So as I was talking before, the plates for the chem plug, they are already taking in consideration the space between the amount of root and the space for the foliage. So that's why you don't have to make 1 on 2 in these plates compared to the multi-cells that we use in the peat mix seedlings in the organic production. So there's this, and there's also another element that the rock wool will hold. The little bunch will hold itself without the roots. It's not the roots that's gonna hold it. It holds by itself. So it's important, but it's not so important, the ratio between the leaves and the roots, because even if your roots are not totally ready, you'll be able to take out the plug. Another thing that is possible to use are these plates that already have their holes and that you can cut with the lines in the bottom. And then there's for broadcast sewing, also for baby leaves, there's an option like this. This is for transplanting. So you can use the blocks with one hole in the middle. People that will sow the cucumber will use this one. We'll see it on the next slide. There's the option with the cube with one hole and a hole for the goutteur for the water.
The dripper.
The dripper. So there's a hole for the dripper. And this is usually for one plant with 2 heads. And you can also have the option to have two plants with single head. You have an option with the square one, and you have an option with the rectangular one. And here, just be careful. The rectangular, you have to think of in which way you are bringing down the plants, like the l'abaissage. Comment on dit abaissage en... Anyway, when you bring them down, there's one way. Lowering, when you're lowering your plants, there's one way you're going in your greenhouse, and if it's a rectangular, you can't just turn it on the other side. If you have the square one, then you can turn 90 degrees, and that's okay, but just take this, you have to think this little aspect before. Also, there are cubes with a little airspace here, over here, so that's good for what we talk about, the air pruning. That will stimulate that on the bottom of the block. So that's a good idea to choose these kind of blocks. So here for again for rock wool, that's a little bit what I was saying on the previous slide. So for tomato, pepper, and eggplant, it's slow grow and it's tolerant to transplanting. So you start with the chem plug, and then you put a little fine vermiculite on top, and then you can transplant in a cube 4x4 or 4x6 with 2 plants. In the case of cucumbers, they're rapid growth and poor tolerance to transplanting. So you're going to sow in the 4x4 under medium perlite in the hole for the transplanting cube. If I can just go back. It's this one for the cucumber. You put the seed in the hole and perlite on top. And use perlite and not vermiculite, because vermiculite will be too wet and too much moisture. Here's for coconut fiber. Coconut fiber, you have about this looks a little bit like the chem plug, but it's cocoa. So it's called a Jiffy preform. This one too, it holds itself by itself, so it's not the root that will make it hold. It holds by itself. Here's one thing not to do is to use the chem plug to transplant in the cocoa, because first, you're going to water the cocoa. You're not going to water the chem plug, and the cocoa is going to suck all the water from the chem plug. So this is something to avoid. So these are examples of cocoa slabs. So for coconut fiber, you have 3 possible scenarios. You sow on the cocoa, you transplant on the cocoa, and you plant on cocoa. So this is very intuitive management. Often causing errors during the planting. Your watering management will be very intuitive. You can also use sowing rock wool and then transplant on cocoa and then plant on cocoa. This is the picture I show you not to do, because the coconut will take all the water from the rock wool by capillarity, and it will create a big stress. So the chem plug will dry too quickly. And then for this part here between the transplanting and the planting, again, it's very intuitive. You don't know too much how the roots are. You really have to check where the roots are and when to water. And here is the best mix you could choose is sowing on rock wool, transplanting on rock wool, and then planting on coconut. So it's a well-known management when you plant, and it's very easy to master this situation. So that's first choice, especially if you're starting. You have to know that coconut cubes are very hard to re-wet. They're long to re-wet, and they're very easy to dry also. There's also the option with peat mix. So there's a sowing substrate from Fafard and Berger. And there is transplanting substrate also, and planting substrate. It's the same mix from Fafard and Berger. So in the PT mix, it's how we we suggest earlier, you should sow 1 on 2 in the 128 trays to give a good ratio, aerial and root ratio. Okay, to have the good balance for that. Transplanting in the double pot, it's a pot in pot. It means your first pot has no bottom, which will be placed on top of the growing medium. So you have the same thing as in the what we were talking earlier. Tomato, cucumber. Cucumber shouldn't be here. Tomato, pepper, and eggplants. You put them in the 6-inch. It's the same ratio to have enough roots for the stage of transplanting. And the 4-inch is good for cucumber and green beans too. For the planting from peat to peat, watering it, you do it as it needs. So as much as the roots are going to go down, then it will penetrate the substrate, the planting substrate. Then the water you will manage the water as it goes, but it can take a while before you need to water. So here it's about the choice of biological substrates. So of course we're talking also about its peat mix mostly. And so seedling and transplanting mix are different. For the seedling, we're looking for low electrical conductivity, and we're looking for good capillarity with the seed. So you need to have the seedling substrate as a fine texture. It's much more, the granulometry is smaller. So here is a recipe for a house blend if you want. It's a 7-part though. So you put one part of compost, 3 peat moss, 2 vermiculite, and 1 land. And land is funny translation. It's just soil. Be aware of not putting too much compost, because it's the compost that will bring the electrical conductivity higher. So that's why in this mix there's only one part of compost. And also prepare your mix just before you use it. Don't make it too much ahead of time, because when you put compost in the mix, it's alive, so the transformation is starting, so your electrical conductivity can get higher, and you don't control that so much.
So if I can add here, so the seedling mix is basically the germination mix, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah.
So here are some optimal concentration that we suggest. You see the electric conductivity should be around 0.75 millisiemens for the seedling, and the pH at 5.8 around there is good. And these are the concentration for elements. The companies don't always give them. That's for house mix, but even for the commercial mix, you can call them and they will give you the analyze, but it's not always like the first information they will give you. So commercial mixtures, there's Berger OM2. This is the most used for seedling mix. Fafard Agromix OS, Lambert LM18, and Premier Tech Promix PG. These are all seedling substrate. And for transplanting, so you see the difference, the EC, the electric conductivity now is at 2 millisiemens per centimeter. So that's more than 2 times more salts than in the other one. So in the house mix, well, then you put 2 parts of compost for the same mix as we put in the seedling one. The commercial mixtures here, there's Berger OM6, there's Fafard Agromix 02, that is very popular. Lambert LM111, and Premier Tech Promix MP Organic. So these are all transplanting mix. The difference, here, just don't forget the cucumbers, they're sown in 4-inch pots, but in seedling mix, not in the transplanting mix. The cucumbers are very fussy on the EC. They don't like the EC to be too high, and that will cause problems for germination and also for Pythium, I think. So does taking your sowing soil, this here we mean the seedling mix with compost, with some fertilizer. Is that okay? There is a difference. Sowing seedling and transplanting mix are different. There is different in the granulometry and the texture. The transplanting one has more fiber, has more bigger pieces that create air. So in the goal of making these beautiful transplant that are well balanced and have a good root system that will implant quickly, it's quite important to take that to make a difference in between. Of course, if you're making just a small amount, we know that it will be easy to say, well, I'll buy just one mix. But if you're making just a little bit more, it's a good gain that you can have by using two different mix. So another question that we get asked sometimes, can we use trays without separation? Well, no. The time you're going to lose, of course, you're going to break some when you separate them, you break the roots. That's not recommended. The goal is to shorten your delay in the nursery to make the nicer transplants. So this is not going in this direction. Multicellular trays. Okay, you can use the 120, use that 50% for the rootstock. Or also you can use the 98 at 50% for rootstock. And you can also, for the science or the graft on top, the ones on top, you can use the 98, but at 100%. As we talked before, we won't use the roots for these, so you can full the plate. So the trays, don't forget you need holes in the trays. It's very important for the air to come in the roots. And if you're afraid to create problems with your lights when you're on the shelves, well, figure out a way to put a plastic under the containers, under your trays, but the roots in between the tray and the plate under. You need to have air over there, so don't use the plates that has no holes. Here's just the example. So the 6-inch pots are good for tomato, pepper, and eggplants because, of course, they're staying longer in the crop. They need to have enough food. They need to have enough water. They will have enough. You'll be able to water them on a normal base more than if you put them in the 4-inch, which when the roots are going to take all the room, you'll spend all your days watering. For the cucumber and the beans, it's good because it lasts just 2-3 weeks. So that's okay. There won't be any problem in the fertilization and the watering. Here's a slide to give you an idea what you need if you're planning on grafting. So you need blades. You can use these type of blades. You can also use just the blades for shaving that you can find at the pharmacy. Clamps of different sizes. So usually we use the 1.5, the 2, and the 2.5. Usually I would say in my experience, we did about 75% was with the 2.0 and 1.5 to the 2.5 because your sizes might be a little different. You might graft on a few days. So it's always good to have different sizes. Also, you need to have plastic domes. Watch out for the greenhouse effect in there. It can get really hot, especially if you're in the greenhouse. Also, watch out. There's in the domes, there are smaller domes. It happened to me. We ordered like the 2 inches, and 2 inch are way too small for grafting. You need to have the 6 or 8-inch high domes. And also, there are some that have a top that you can turn, and there's holes that can take out the heat. So that's a good idea. But there's also other ways of doing the grafting. It's just if you want to use the domes, then they look like that. There's also, you can make a small room for them there's all different options, but we're going to talk about that more in January. You need sprayers to always keep humidity in there. And also you have to think of a shade cloth. If you graft in the greenhouse, you have to cut the direct sun on your grafting area. Also, a few little equipment. So the electrical conductivity reader. So this one, it's important to have. The pH meter, if you're in hydroponic, it's a must. Then there's the soil thermometer. So there's this one, the small one for the pots, and the big one for the ground. Other equipment, this is just reminder, it's good to think about the access of water in the nursery to make it easy, to make it, don't want the watering to become a problem. It has to be the plant need water. It's easy to give water. Always think this way. Also think of having soft watering nozzles for the seedlings, and for the transplant also you want to have a flow valve to decide how much and how soft the water is going to come out. So it's just little details. And stakes and ties over here, that's one element. If you want to have the right size of transplant in the greenhouse, they get big, sometimes they start to fall, so we use the stakes here, what you use in the kitchen when you want to make the brochette. These are bamboo sticks, about 10 or 11 inch, I think, and they make the job really good. Also, if you're well equipped for your watering system, then you will avoid soaking the trays from below. Soaking the trays from below is really not recommended. It's really perfect for disturbing the seed, distributing the seeds disease or substract disease. So also when you water by the bottom, the salts are gonna stay on top, and this is really not good for your seedlings. And one last slide here, the fertilization for transplants. So it's just good to have stock on the farm. If you need, if your transplant need a little bit fertility, then you can have fish emulsion or liquid seaweeds. That's more for really small seedlings in the plates. But also it's good to have the Actisol in small pellets, in small granules. So they spread better on the pot, and they get to the plant. They decompose easily on top of the plant. So just to have one bag of the small pellets of Actisol. For the ground, it's good to use the big one, but for the pots, it's good to have a little amount of this one. So, and of course, the fertilization of transplant, we're going to talk about it in January, but for the longer crops, tomato, pepper, and eggplants, there will be a fertilization in between the transplant, when you transplant in the pot, before you bring them in the ground, before you plant them. In between of that, they will need a fertilization, and having the Actisol in small pellets is a very good idea for that step. But we talk about that more in January. So that is all what we had for you today. We can now take a few questions if you have some.
All right, merci beaucoup. That was well done. We do have some time for questions, so please. I have a few. Of course, I always have some, but there's time for a few questions. So please, you can mute yourself. You can activate your video if you'd like at this point, but we've got at least 15 minutes of questions if you'd like to ask.
I've got a quick question. We touched on it a little bit with the densities, and I know me and Jacques talked about it last year, but in a greenhouse that's mixed use, so we have crops that are low, for instance, like carrots that are going in and then coming out, where we'll have an empty row. Can we increase the density of the tomatoes next to that. So essentially, it's getting more light. Can we increase the density in that row? And how much? And Jacques, I know we talked about it, but I just would love to hear about it again, essentially, to get it stuck in my mind.
Yes, that was a question we had earlier too. The rows that are exposed, like sometimes it's the outside row, or like you said, you have a lower crop that will take more, will receive more light. So of course you can go up to 25-30% extra for this side. But you also have to think that this row will need more fertilization and more water probably.
Perfect. So we'd be increasing the fertilization and the water by the same amount, essentially, by the 25 to 35% as well. Is that sort of the idea?
Yeah.
Great,
Yeah.
great. Perfect. Thank you.
That's a very good question, because I was going to ask that one. It's a follow-up to the question Amy had earlier. My big concern in increasing that density, if we're in a minimally heated greenhouse or greenhouse that's not so sophisticated where the climate is not perfectly managed, that's another factor that we might want to consider here. So increasing density has its risk as well. So you've got increased fertility, increased water, but there may be a little enhanced management needed as well.
That was a question or a comment?
No, it was just a comment. Yeah.
Okay.
Because getting back to your spreadsheet, someone could, like Mike was just saying, he could say, well, no, I this is not the density. I want higher density because it's a single row of tomatoes in the middle of the greenhouse, and he could do that in that row and have everything calculated for him.
Yeah. Yeah, so the idea of 25 to 30% is about the range that we usually add. And it's good to think about your water and your fertilization ahead of time before you get there and you say, what's going on? They're so reproductive, they're so weak, if you know you put more density, you know they have more light, then you do it right away in prevention instead of reaching the point that they're going to miss out on water, they're going to miss out on food.
And usually, Claude, when we know that, we will add one drip line at the beginning of the year that will just turn on when we will need it.
Okay. I like one of your last comments, Elisabeth, about fertilizing before transplanting, before going into the field, before going into the greenhouse. And Jacques, that's an observation that we've noticed on several farms. You know, basically you take your transplant, you put it in, this is more organic, but you put it in the soil, and then, you know, the root mass might run out of fertility, or it takes so much time to get to anchor itself and spread itself into the soil that you start to see deficiency, and then it's really hard to correct. So fertilizing before putting it in a greenhouse makes a lot of sense.
But that's not what I said earlier, though.
Oh,
I was saying, if you know that you put more a higher density, plan that that the crop will need more. Don't wait that it will have a deficiency in order to say, oh, I got to put more. Oh, how come it's always dry? If you already plan that you put a higher density, then plan that you're going to need more water, and plan that you're going to need more food.
And Claude, let's imagine that you develop a poor root system in the nursery and you put the plant in the greenhouses. So it means that your plant will work longer on the pot.
yeah.
So your fertility has to be there during the time that the plant will move from the pot to the soil. So usually we saw some problem with peppers on that. They keep the plant very long. They didn't have the new fertilizer. They put the plant on the soil, and the plant didn't start. What we realized is that we had to give fertilizer to the pot once it in the soil to start the root system in the pot, and after that colonize the soil.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That I think is a good topic for January.
You're right.
Yeah.
And what you said, Claude, to fertilize before you bring the plants in the greenhouse, especially for the greenhouses. This is a really good tip to fertilize a week or maybe 10 days before, because if the soil is cold, it has to mineralize and the food has to be ready when the roots are going to come out from the pot. So this is yeah, I will put it in the presentation in January.
But what you're saying is fertilize, bring the fertility in the soil as well to get the soil to mineralize so that the nutrients are there. That's what you're saying.
Before, yeah.
So I would say that was one of my biggest take-home message this spring when we traveled together with Jacques and with you, is that we probably should have conditioned our soil earlier, and maybe increase the moisture of the soil too, because some of our soils, they were in the greenhouse and basically the plants arrived at the same time as the drip lines. That was a bit problematic as well.
Yeah, I think there's a few that remembers it too.
Yeah. Changing this subject, there's not many questions, but Jacques, you had a really interesting comment earlier with the first group about the efficiency in heating the greenhouse or the nursery really well for a shorter period of time versus, well, I'm going to plant a little earlier and I'm just going to put a little heat and, I'm going to grow it over so many days instead of a shorter period. Maybe you can comment on that. I'm not given the answer, but maybe you can comment a little bit on this one.
Yeah, okay. When you are in the nursery stage, if you keep cool the greenhouses or the place where you grow the plant, the delay, if you are in greenhouses, this is mainly for greenhouses because we pay a lot to eat, okay? So if you're in the greenhouses and you keep cold or cool, you will increase the time between your plant will be ready. And usually you can have when I started with growers in Quebec, we had some people that spend 2 months to produce one plant of tomatoes. And at the time with one graft, so it was close to 3 weeks longer than it required. So we just start to say to people to grow faster, so increase temperature, and they save nearly 3 weeks to 1 month. What I'm saying is that the cost for the 3 weeks that we save, it's when the cost is the highest because it's colder. So it's better to start later, but eat when it's the time. For sure, for people that have a lot of crop, as Mike said before, when you have a lot of crop, you have to do compromise. But don't do compromise to save aid. Do compromise for the crop. Because when you believe you save heat, you don't save. You just do longer. You just stay longer time in the greenhouses, and finally you pay more for the start of the crop when it was the coldest time of the year.
Yeah, and I will add also that when you keep cool at that period, you create very vegetative crops, which your quality of fruit is not going to be good. One day I told my one client, I said, well, your plants are really nice, but it's too bad you're not selling any leaves. There was no flowers, there was no fruit on the crop. It was just green, green, green of vegetation. So the cool temperature at that period, because we receive a lot of light, the temperature has to be matched with the light we receive and the stage of the plant. So yeah, they can. I'm sure I'm not surprised, Doc, you're talking about 3 weeks.
And maybe we can add to that, Claude, for cucumber. If you do a very large, strong plant with a big stem, usually the cells of the stem are very large and weak. So the risk of PTM is increasing. Usually we want to have a smaller stem, not stretched, but just smaller. You don't try to do a too fat plant of cucumber because you will have a lot of problem later.
Yeah.
I'll ask one more if there's time. I'm just wondering about pinching. You discussed. We aren't grafting our tomatoes, but we're growing 2 heads per plant. But we often just take a strong leader under the first flower cluster kind of thing. Would it be better if we were pinching earlier on at that transplant stage to get kind of 2 evenly sized heads as opposed to having sort of a bit more of a main head and a slightly smaller sucker? And Jacques, we talked last year about ways to mitigate that in terms of the trellising, sort of lowering down the main stem and allowing them to get to the same height. But I'm just wondering if you can speak to that a bit, if we should be kind of pinching at that stage or what you think.
I think the question was for you, Jacques.
Really?
Anyone
I can
can
answer, but it seems like
I thought you wanted to have your opinion, but okay.
I can have my opinion too.
Okay. If you decided to start to pinch the plant, you will start to harvest on the 2 head earlier. If you keep the sucker later, the sucker under the first cluster, we'll start to harvest first on the main stem and close to 2 weeks later on the second stem. So usually people that start the sucker under the first cluster is because they don't want to have too much fruit when they start on the market. But if your goal is to have the highest yield, it's better to pinch.
Great. And that should be done, I forget what the timing was, but around 20 days or something like that. Was that, I forget. I can just check back to that. But
yeah, but we will show. Well,
there's two options on that. You can pinch when the third true leaf will come out. You have the 2 cotyledons, and then you have 1, 2. The third one you will pinch, and you will have 2 suckers that will come out. That is one way that goes quite fast, but that can create uneven suckers, uneven heads sometimes. But it goes fast because there's 2 leaves, so the suckers will come out fast. The other option that you have is you have the 2 cotyledons, and you will pinch at the first leaf, and the 2 heads are going to come out from the cotyledons. That's usually making them quite even, but it's scary, but it works.
There's a presentation that Mike, that we've shared. It was from Climax Conseil years ago. Philippe Antoine, I think there was 2 or 3 slides on that. I know you have a copy of that presentation, but if you go look, there's some graphic image on how when it's done, and it gives you the advantages and disadvantages. It's really well done. If someone needs this, I can share this with them as well. You may be talking about it in January, but I'm looking at the time. Maybe one more question, and then we'll have to wrap up. Well, okay, I see Fran is looking for that document, so I'll make sure, Fran, you get a copy of that older document. But it's very well made. It's Climax Conseil again, and but we'll be able to share that with you. So it's 4:57. I think at this point we're gonna close the session, and I just like to thank again Elisabeth and Jacques for their sharing of information. And for us, it's a pleasure to see you again, because we've seen you during the growing season. But the whole concept of, sharing knowledge is very important to us. And if we want to have our vegetable greenhouse sector and the CEA sector thrive and move forward, we really need to focus on more of that training. So that said, thank you very much. And just to remind the group that there will be another session January 11th. This time it's going to be hands-on, how to produce the transplants. So I guess Elisabeth and Jacques will be with us again then. And then let me mention to you that the Department of Agriculture is organizing a Hort Congress for mid-March here in Fredericton. It's March 15th and 16th, and there will be sessions on CEA and greenhouse production. And we're fortunate enough to have Climax Conseil again this time around. So we will see them again in March. And in the meantime, we'll be revamping and see if we can get our project together for the next few months and the next fiscal year. So again, thank you so much, everyone. And if there's a follow-up needed on this call, just reach out to myself or other Department of Agriculture staff. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.